Good morning, everyone. Bom dia, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jason Marzak, Senior Director of the Adrian Arce Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. Welcome to today's conversation on Brazil's path ahead in an election year. 2022 is a highly consequential year for Brazilian democracy, with presidential, congressional, and state-level elections taking place in October. And the campaign and outcome will also shape the trajectory of Brazil's relations with the United States and its broader position in global affairs. These elections will happen amid a backdrop of political polarization and the need for forward-looking public policy to rebuild from the COVID pandemic. Democracy, its principles, and its benefits to citizens have been increasingly questioned in Brazil, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean, and frankly, across the world. This makes this year's votes all the more important. Today, we welcome to the Atlantic Council studios here in Washington, D.C., Sergio Moro, former judge and Brazil's former Minister of Justice. Sergio Moro became widely known given his role as the judge in the Operation Car Wash investigation that unveiled a network of corruption at the highest levels of the Brazilian government. He then joined President Bolsonaro's administration as Brazil's Minister of Justice, resigning in 2020. Minister Moro was, until last week, a presidential pre-candidate running as an alternative to the top two contenders, former President Lula and President Bolsonaro. Although his political future remains to be determined after leaving the Podemos party as its pre-candidate, he has not ruled out running for higher office as part of a new party. Mr. Moro also continues to play a significant role in uniting the center in Brazil and speaking up on issues of corruption and security. With 6 months before the election, today's conversation will shed light on Brazil's fight against corruption, the state of its democracy, the role of the judiciary, and of course, the viability of a third-way presidential candidate in this year's elections. What is the role of the Brazilian judiciary and justice system in shaping political developments and other democratic institutions? And how could Brazil be transformed politically, economically, and socially as it recovers from the COVID pandemic and after this year's elections? Minister Moro, once again, thank you and welcome to the Atlantic Council. It's great to have you with us today. We look forward to an engaging conversation. I'm now going to turn over to my colleague, Valentina Sader, who's the Associate Director and Brazil Lead at the Adrian Arce Latin America Center, who will moderate today's conversation. Valentina, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome again, everyone. Welcome, Minister Moro, to the Atlantic Council. As a reminder, if you are joining us virtually, please make sure to follow us on Twitter at ACLatam and follow the discussion using the hashtag ACBrazil. If you are connected via Zoom, we welcome your questions, so please send them to us via the Q&A feature. Minister Moro, thank you again for joining us. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. Without further ado, I wanted to kick off our conversation discussing Brazil's democracy and the role of the judiciary. Across the world, we have seen significant questioning over how well democracy is actually functioning and serving the people. Brazil is not an exception. Minister Moro, given your career within the Brazilian justice system and more recently as former Minister of Justice of Brazil, what do you see as the role of the judiciary in ensuring resilient democratic institutions and effective checks and balances?
Thank you very much, Valentina. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for the invitation to be at the Atlantic Council. It's an honor for me. We copy in Brazil the United States model of the separate of the branches. So we have the executive, we have the legislative, the Congress, and also we have the judiciary branch. The Brazilian courts, they have the power of the judicial review of the laws. And we are seeing the last, especially in this administration, in this government, several attacks against the Brazilian judiciary from the government. And the judiciary is being important to resist some of these threats, some of these attacks, to give some kind of balance, political stability in Brazil. By the other side, it's unfortunate to say that the Brazilian judiciary, with all due respect, played a wrongful role in undermining the recent efforts in Brazil against the fight against corruption. Okay? We have a lot of improvements during the car wash operation. For the first time, we have seen in Brazil powerful businessmen, powerful politicians being held accountable for their crimes and starting to pay for them. It's important for a country that needs to be committed to the rule of law. But in the last 2 years, we start to see, especially by part of our Supreme Court, the overruling of some of these convictions, based usually in technicalities, and sending, in my opinion, the wrong message to the people, and undermining the recent efforts against corruption. So if you put both things at the balance, there's some controversial about the results.
So thinking about that in some of the mentions that you've made just now, how do you see as a way to balance the judicial oversight with non-partisanship? So ensuring that there is a non-partisanship, a neutrality in a way in doing this judicial oversight and making sure that the rules are followed and the judiciary is functioning properly.
To be very honest, I believe we suffer in Brazil for a lack of leadership, especially at the presidential level. If we have a good president, he would probably make good choices for justice to the Supreme Court, and then the Congress also needs to play a more strong role in making the screening of the candidates. Without this, without a vision that you need to make our institution stronger, it's very difficult, because we copy the same model of the United States. The president chooses a candidate and present it to the Senate, who approve or not the nomination. In Brazilian history, the Senate never refused a candidate. So this seems that not that proper. We have some candidates that have been reproved in the beginning of the last century, but it was very particular situations. For example, the nomination of a medicine and not a jurist for the Supreme Court. So, and the other point, I believe, this is not only about the judiciary, okay? For example, for our regulatory agencies, also I believe it's lacking a little bit more of institutional vision about the importance of having autonomy agencies, autonomy, even state-owned companies. We are seeing now another change of the CEO of Petrobras in Brazil. This brings instability for the company and for the country. We have in this administration 3 directors of the federal police, and they are changed without giving proper reasons. So, well, what's going on?
Elections across the world have been characterized by significant disinformation and misinformation. How has disinformation further increased polarization in Brazil? How does it threaten democracy?
That's a very good question. Well, we need to have fair elections. And part of the democratic process involves the necessity to have the truth of the facts. Of course, sometimes there is space for some kind of dispute about the facts, and people have different opinions. This is part of democracy. But what we are seeing, not only in Brazil, but all over the world, is the spread of fake news. For example, in Brazil, some people used to say that I'm a kind of CIA agent because of my work at the car wash operation that affected the Workers' Party from the left. But it was just a coincidence because the Workers' Party was in power during the corruption scandal. But this is kind of exotic, but it's the kind of thing that circulates through the social media. And well, this should not happen. Even the president sometimes, the candidate, the former president Lula, used to say things like that. So, well, you need to have a commitment with the facts and with the truth. There was John Adams, I believe, who said facts are stubborn things. But in this new age of the social media, sometimes it's difficult to endorse the facts.
So thinking about that, the Brazil Supreme Electoral Court recently increased cooperation with social media platforms to counter disinformation ahead of this year's elections in October. What are some ways that the judiciary can enforce those, and what are some ways that the judiciary can actually make sure that this disinformation is not so widespread?
This is a difficult task. Probably the courts need to have a more, you can say, a stronger approach about punishment. The problem is it's very difficult to avoid the spread of fake news. This happens so quick, and it's difficult to reach the courts with a proper measure in a proper time. So maybe the point was to try to identify who is the author, who is the one who gets the credits for this kind of misinformation, and punish him severely, even if maybe with the cassation of the candidature. Maybe we need to work on that. And of course, it's a problem because sometimes you could be seen as a kind of censorship, and maybe forbidding the legitimate discussion about public policy.
Minister Moro, we've spoken about the role of the judiciary and the threat of disinformation to a healthy democracy, and you mentioned the car wash operation, so I wanted to turn a little bit into the corruption field. Corruption is a threat to the well-functioning of democratic institutions and the assurance of the rule of law. What were some key steps taken during your time as Minister of Justice to fight corruption in Brazil? And in what ways can Brazil continue to address potential sources of corruption and promote transparency in governance?
Well, when I was Minister of Justice, I presented a bill before the Congress called the Anti-Crime Project, Anti-Crime Bill. We had there several measures that were important to strengthen the enforcement of the law against corruption. I guaranteed during my term the autonomy of the federal police from the government. Of course, the government could influence in certain way the work of the police. So, for example, I defined some goals for the federal police. We need to focus on the fight against corruption, organized crime, and environmental crime. During my term, I guarantee that they only have this kind of general mandates, because the Minister of Justice could not be involved in specific investigations. Because when you do that, this became dangerous because there could be a political use, especially in investigations involving corruption. So I guarantee the autonomy of the federal police. That's also one of the reasons why I left. When the president decided to interfere in the federal police without a proper cause. Of course, you could change the director of the federal police, but you need a proper cause for that. Then I decided to resign. Of course, there was also, before of these moments, strong disagreements with the president with several issues, but that was the point that I need to go. I need to leave. Something that we could do, for example, mandates for the director of the federal police. I believe it's important, like you have here in the United States for the director of the FBI. We need to eliminate the stand privilege, called in Brazil foro privilegiado. This work as a protection a shield for congressmen, for ministers, for the president against accountability. I'm not sure if all the audience is aware about what it is, the foro privilegiado. It means that any charge, any investigation against congressmen in Brazil, for example, needs to be done before the Supreme Court and through the Attorney General. And this, in practice, acts as a tool for impunity. And also, I believe it's not healthy for the relation between the Supreme Court and the Congress and Supreme Court and the executive. Okay, so one point that we really need to do in Brazil is to eliminate foro privilegiado. There are several other measures. For example, the whistleblower programs. We know that here in the United States, the Dodd-Frank Act make a lot of improvements on this field. We in Brazil, we don't have strong whistleblower programs in the administration. I approved a law that provides some measures about whistleblower, but it was not implemented after I left the government. That's very sad.
Talk about Brazilian domestic politics as well as a Brazilian foreign policy. In the lead up to the elections in October, a lot has been said about the current state of the Brazilian government and the Brazilian economy. The country is experiencing high levels of inflation, poverty, and inequality. Minister Moro, you've mentioned that you see Brazil's biggest problem as being inflation. In your opinion, how can Brazil balance rising economic inequality with policies that actually promote investment and growth in Brazil, especially in this post-COVID scenario and situation?
No, this is a challenge, but when you walk through Brazil, and I was doing my pre-campaign, we talk to the regular people, and the major reason of complaint is the inflation. We know that it's a world phenomenon, but the rates in Brazil are very high, and there are reasons, local reasons also for that, because the government now is spending much more money than it could. I believe we are now lacking some fiscal equilibrium in our budgets, and this is also helping to increase inflation. So the first step is to Brazil needs credibility, not only for people in Brazil, but also for foreign investors and foreign countries. Nowadays, Brazil is not seen very well before the world community. So you need, in my opinion, a new government with a clear agenda for modernization in several fields like economic growth, control of inflation, environmental protection, the rule of law, the fight against corruption. You need a complete change. Unfortunately, I don't see that this will happen with Bolsonaro or Lula, the actual other candidates running for the presidential campaign. You need to make some steps back and start to understand what went wrong in the last years. Of course, we have the COVID crisis, the pandemic crisis, but I believe we could be in a much better situation now, even with the pandemic, with the proper policies. For example, this administration abandoned completely the reform agenda since at least 2020. The government made one important reform, the pension reform, and then even before the pandemic, abandoned the other major reforms like the tax reform.
Minister Moro, the United States is Brazil's second largest trading partner. In investment terms, it represents almost a fifth of foreign direct investment to Brazil. The Atlantic Council has worked to strengthen U.S.-Brazil economic ties, promoting key recommendations to both the U.S. and Brazilian governments to further bilateral trade and investment, working directly with the private sector from both countries. What are some policies that you believe Brazil's next president should prioritize to continue to deepen U.S.-Brazil trade and investment ties and further Brazil's economic growth?
We should make a free trade agreement with the United States. There are also some details that we could work. For example, smaller things like a tax agreement to avoid double taxation in a country, in both countries. We need to be more aligned with the Western democracies. What we have seen in the last months in Brazil with the Ukraine war was, in my opinion, shameful, because the Brazilian government did not make it clear that the invasion of Ukraine was wrong, and this situation was a clear violation of the international law. Of course, Brazil wants to have good relations with every country. We want to be friendly neighbors of everyone. We want to trade with everyone, with China, with Russia, with United States. But also, I believe Brazil needs to take a stand. You need to sometimes take a stand and say, "Well, this is wrong. I don't agree with that." I'm not saying that, of course, Brazil should not go to war. Nobody is going to war. Sanctions is another thing, but a clear statement was mandatory, in my opinion, to align ourselves with the Eastern democracies. But in terms of trade, I said the free trade agreement with the United States would be a good thing. And also, I believe we need to do more in Brazil about the protection of the environment, especially in relation with the Amazon. We need to decrease the rates of the deforestation. In truth, we need to look for zero deforestation, and this will help us to bring more investments, because we know also in the private sector now the importance of the ESG movement.
You mentioned alliance with Western democracies in terms of foreign policy. So my next question to you is about how do you see, what are some key opportunities for U.S. and Brazil to cooperate further? What are some themes that the U.S. and Brazil could cooperate further on foreign policy issues? You mentioned the economy, you mentioned the war on Ukraine, you mentioned trade, and you mentioned also the environment. But what are some other sectors that we could be looking to deepen relations with the United States?
For example, one issue that's very important, the fight against corruption. Let's remember that it was very important during the car wash operation, the cooperation with the US DOJ here. The US DOJ also helps to spread the evidence of corruption, of bribery in other countries in Latin America. So when the countries work together in cooperation, we could get good results. Okay. Also in terms about security of both countries, I believe we could improve our relation. And well, in my opinion, and sometimes Brazil have a problem of kind of anti-Americanism feeling. Maybe there is some reasons to complain against the United States, but sometimes just use it internally as a political argument without having a proper reason to invoke this kind of argument. I believe Brazil should be more aligned with the Western democracies, and of course, United States is a very important country to do that. Of course, not an automatic alliance. Brazil has a tradition of certain kind of neutrality. We don't want to enter in fights that belong to other countries, but we need to intensify our relationships.
Minister Moro, you mentioned a few times the environment and the protection on climate. My question to you is about what is Brazil's role in actually protecting the environment further, and how can the next administration in Brazil further protect climate, the Amazon, and use the ESG, for example, that you mentioned, but also some other innovations on protecting the environment in Brazil and furthering that?
First, we need to speak about the truth in Brazil. Brazil is one of the countries which has great sources of renewable energy. Okay, we are one of the greatest producer of food in the world, and this is very important. It will be very important in the next years, the next dates. Our agriculture that exports is not responsible for the deforestation of the Amazon. Okay. But by the other side, we are seeing the increasing rates of deforestation, and the government has the capability to deal with this issue. In the past, we were able to reduce deforestation, so we could do this again because now we have more technological tools. And I believe if Brazil do that and also change the speech, especially the speech of the president, Brazil could be a leader in the world, not only in sustainable development, but also in as a producer of food for the world. And this would put Brazil again in a major role as I'll not say maybe a kind of leader in the world community. This would be very important for Brazil, not only to take another stand on this debate, but also showing to the world that Brazil recognizes its responsibility in avoiding the worst consequences of the climate change.
Minister Moro, now looking ahead to the upcoming elections in Brazil. Up until last week, you were a presidential pre-candidate, ranking third in voter intention polls. Last week, you announced your affiliation with the União Brasil party and concluded your presidential candidacy, at least temporarily. Minister Moro, I'm going to ask you the question that we've all been waiting to hear. What are your next steps? Can we expect to see you as a presidential candidate for the União Brasil? Will you run for senator or congressman instead? Will you take any political position? What are your next steps?
Well, let's see the contest, okay? Everyone in Brazil, the press, the civil society, was saying that we need only one candidate of the center to be a presidential running at this election. Because if it's already hard to face polarization in Brazil between Lula and Bolsonaro. In a certain way, one feeds the other part. If the center is fragmented, as it was, I believe it would be very hard to face this challenge. So I make a decision to take a step back. I understand that I need a stronger political party to face the challenge of polarization, and I decide to affiliate at the União Brasil. And I make my name available for the party. I cannot go to a new party and say, oh, I'm the presidential candidate, but my name is there available for this position or other position that they understand that it could be worked, or I could not be a candidate of nothing. What I already said that I'll not be a candidate for a deputy, federal deputy, congressman. Okay, but the point is that if we are not, if we don't make some sacrifice to unite the center, we will go nowhere. And we need that the political world of the center need to be united to face the challenges of this the polarization.
So on that topic, actually, the elections in October are already shaping up to be extremely polarized. Polls show a scenario in which the main contest will be between President Bolsonaro and former President Lula. You have recently been in conversation with key political figures in this upcoming election, like presidential pre-candidate Simone Tebet from the MDB, and now former Governor of Rio Grande do Sul, Eduardo Leite, from the PSDB, who was just here last month, actually at the Atlantic Council, talking about a coordination of the center. Do you believe that there is still a space for an alliance of the center for a third way candidacy with a broad political base? And if so, what challenges would that candidate face in the upcoming elections and in the current electoral environment?
There is a space. There are a lot of time until the election in October. You could feel in Brazil that neither of the other candidates of the extremes are probably a first choice of the majority of the population. Usually when you talk, well, I will vote to Bolsonaro because I want to avoid Lula, or vice versa. So the elections should be better than that. But we need to have a unique, in my opinion, candidate for the center with the support of the major political parties of the center. The main question is, are the political parties of the center, they really want to have a competitive candidate to run against the extremes? Or not? Does the country really want to have a candidate of the center to face the extremes? That are the main questions. I make my name is still available on the table. Of course, it depends on the decision of the president of the political party, Luciano Bivar, who is the main person in charge of the coordination of these efforts of the center. I said since the beginning that I would never give up from the presidential race, and that's true. I'm only making a step back because I felt that this is necessary to have the possibility to win against these extremes.
Minister Moro, we received a question from the audience that I wanted to read for you. We received this question saying, even though you said that you gave up the candidacy for president at this moment, millions of Brazilians continue to say Moro or blank. So they are either going to vote for you or they're going to vote blank. What do you have to say to these Brazilians?
Oh, and don't lose the hope. Well, I'm not sure about the result of this movement, okay? But I'm always available. I never give up from a fight. During the car wash, it was very hard because in a country that lives with impunity of grand corruption, we face the challenge. We suffer the consequences. Then, when I went to the government, the same thing. We face, for example, the organized crime in São Paulo, as no administration before have done. And I resigned. I believe my act of resign in the Bolsonaro administration was an act of certain, I cannot compliment myself, bravery, because I suffer a lot of consequences, but I cannot agree with that administration. And now I put my name on this presidential race because I understand that Brazil needs something better than Lula and Bolsonaro, but I need the proper tools to go ahead. So I make this movement. My name is still available. It will depend on the decision of the political parties involving, and of course on the coordination of the president of the União Brasil, Luciano Bivar. Anyway, I'll continue to contribute with my country in the way that it could be possible. But we need to unite the center to face Lula or Bolsonaro.
we received another question from the Brazilian Times, actually, saying, if elected, so in terms, let's put it in terms of the next president, what's the strategy to approve the necessary reforms within Congress? You mentioned the tax reform, and you mentioned some of the reforms that this government has put out. What are some of the strategies to actually pass those reforms through, especially the administrative reform and the tax reform, for the next president, for the next government?
You need to do this quickly in the first semester, using the civic energy. Let's think about someone defeats Lula and Bolsonaro at the elections in October. This person will have a victory with a lot of credibility and legitimacy, and need to push the reforms quickly in this first semester. My strategy for that, you need to combine not only the economic reforms, but you need to, I was speaking about a ethical package that need to be presented with tax reform and with administrative reform. This ethical package would include the end of the elimination of the foro privilegiado, for example, the establishing a term for the director of the federal police. I believe this is very important. The end of the re-election for the president. Okay, this needs to be done because it did not work in Brazil. We are seeing this situation now that a former president and the actual president, they are running against each other in this election. And in my opinion, usually this contaminates the term of anyone who gets there, because the person starts to think since the first day about his re-election and not in the benefit of the people. We are seeing, for example, not only on the federal government, but on the state level, several governors spreading expense, looking for tax benefits for companies, usually to win the elections in this year. So you are sacrificing the healthy of your budget to gain the elections. This is not a very good thing, because there isn't the next year. And the same is happening in the presidential campaign. So this ethical package, it would give to the president this necessary strength to go ahead with the other reforms. And I'm a true believer in that the economic growth depends on the quality of your institutions. So it's not only making changes in taxes, it's not only making changes in the administration. You need to do more. You need to send a message to the people that you need a different country with rule of law, with the fight against corruption, a country that looks for equality to the people, not only in benefits, but also in the sense that no one should be above the law. This is lacking in Brazil.
And to conclude, Minister Moro, I would like to look ahead beyond the elections. Regardless of who will be Brazil's next president in this year's elections, Brazilians will also choose congressional representatives and state-level representatives. With over 30 political parties, how can Brazil's next president work with all groups to ensure the country's governability and reduce fragmentation?
Probably need a political reform in Brazil. This is so messed. All these parties, they are more worried sometimes with gaining its political space. Of course, that's what politicians do, but with so many parts, it's really difficult. So that's the reason that we need a strong leadership in Brazil, but strong not in the wrong way. Strong in the way with a person committed with reform and with the rule of law. Probably in the future, this should include a reform in our political institutions, trying to reduce the number of the political parties and strengthen the internal rules for more fidelity at the votes before the Congress.
Is this something that, if taking a political position, whatever it may be, would that be a priority for you?
Of course, of course. I'll continue to fight for my country in any position, with a mandate or without a mandate. Now, as I said, I'm playing the game. I'm still in the game, okay? But I understand the necessity to have a unique candidate of the center. Anyone is better than Lula and Bolsonaro. I believe, and the poll shows that I'm the most competitive candidate. The question is that, is the country ready for what we propose for it or not? Or if it desires still Lula or Bolsonaro? And sorry to say that, all the degeneration of the institutions that come with both.
So I guess let's see what happens next. Let's see your next moves and what ends up happening with the Brazilian elections that will take place in October this year. With that, I would like to conclude our conversation by thanking you, Minister Moro, for your time, for your insights and reflections today, for coming to the Atlantic Council. We at the Adrian Arce Latin America Center will continue to follow and analyze the developments ahead of the Brazilian elections this year, at this critical year for Brazil. So don't miss out on our upcoming event with presidential pre-candidate Ciro Gomes on Monday, April 11th. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day. Thank you, Minister Moro, once again.
Thank you very much.